I've dealt with all kinds of calls in my career, domestic disputes, noise complaints, the occasional drunk argument that got too loud for a Friday night. But never in my life did I think I'd get a call about myself, that IT was one of those clear suburban mornings that look calm from the outside, but carry a quiet tension underneath. The air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass and wet asphalt. Sunlight spilled through the blinds of my kitchen window as I poured coffee into my old sheriff's mug, the one with the county seal half-faded from years of dishwashing. For once, I wasn't in uniform. Just a man in his own driveway, in his own neighborhood, enjoying a rare day off. My patrol truck sat at the end of the drive, polished and spotless. It parked it there the night before after a long shift, too tired to pull it all the way into the garage. And that, apparently, was my crime that I noticed the white SUV before I heard the voice. The HOA president, Cheryl, stepped out like she was walking into a press conference. Perfectly ironed khakis, clipboard in hand, and that look, the kind people get when they believe a rule gives them power. "Excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with authority she didn't actually have. "You can park that vehicle in your driveway. It violates community standards." I glanced at her, then at my truck, county plates gleaming under the sun, the star emblem on the side catching the light. "Morning to you too, Cheryl," I said evenly. "That's my patrol vehicle. I'll be moving it later." She tightened her grip on the clipboard. "Doesn't matter what kind of vehicle it is. It's a violation of Section 8B, no commercial or law enforcement vehicles visible from the street overnight." I set my coffee down on the hood of the truck and leaned against it, half amused. "That section doesn't apply to official emergency vehicles," I said calmly. "You can check your bylaws again." Her lips pressed thin. "We'll see about that," she snapped, spinning on her heel. That I should have known that "we'll see" was a declaration of war. By the time I finished breakfast, there were 2 more HOA board members standing on the sidewalk, whispering like kids plotting behind the teacher's back. They kept glancing at my truck as if it were something dangerous. I thought it would blow over, but then the phony on my counter buzzed. "Sheriff's office," I answered automatically. Sheriff," came my deputy's hesitant voice. "Dispatch just got a call about a law enforcement vehicle illegally parked in Maple Grove subdivision. Caller says it's suspicious." I blinked, disbelief breaking into a laugh. "Let me guess," I said. "White SUV. Woman named Cheryl." He paused. "You already know." "Oh, I know," I sighed. "I'll handle it." When I stepped outside, Cheryl stood proudly beside 2 HOA volunteers, one holding a phone like she was documenting evidence. "You can't intimidate us," she said. "We've already reported you." The irony was sharp enough to cut glass, but I could have pulled my badge right then. I could have shut it down in 5 seconds. But part of me wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. There's a certain curiosity that comes with being in law enforcement, the need to understand what makes people cross lines they didn't even see. "All right," I said with a calm smile. "You do what you think is right." I went back inside, coffee still warm, and waited 10 minutes later. A county cruiser rolled up. My deputy stepped out, eyes flicking between and the small crowd of HOA board members filming the scene. He looked like a man walking into a bad sitcom. "A morning, Sheriff," he said, awkwardly tipping his hat. Cheryl puffed herself up, standing between us. "I'm glad you're here," she said to him. "This vehicle is parked illegally. It needs to be towed immediately." My deputy bit his lip, glanced at me, then said carefully, "Ma'am, that's the sheriff's truck." The silence that followed could have swallowed the whole street. Her expression didn't break at first. Then it did, a twitch in the jaw, a blink too slow. "What?" she stammered. That's not possible. We were just enforcing the rules." I smiled slightly. "I know," I said softly. "I appreciate your concern for the neighborhood's safety." The deputy nearly laughed. Cheryl didn't. The other board members stepped back, their faces draining of color. Cheryl turned without another word, heading back to her SUV in stiff silence, that I watched them go, sipping my coffee. For most people, that would have been the end. But I knew better. People like Cheryl didn't stop when they were embarrassed. They doubled down, and sure enough, by evening, a bright orange notice was taped to my front door. Violation, unauthorized vehicle, $500 fine. I stared at it for a long moment, the sun dipping low behind the rooftops, the sound off sprinklers hissing down the street. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else, Cheryl was probably typing an email about consistent enforcement. I folded the notice carefully and placed it beside my badge. "All right," I muttered. "Let's play this your way." The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds and painted gold stripes across middening table. The orange violation notice still sat there beside my badge, bright, smug, and absurd. I stared at it over a cup of black coffee, and I couldn't help but smile that I am my years as sheriff. I'd seen people break the law, bend it, even try to rewrite it, but had never met anyone quite like an HOA president with a clipboard. Cheryl wasn't enforcing order. She was enforcing control. There's a difference, and that difference is what gets people in trouble. That I folded the notice, slid it into a folder labeled Maple Grove HOA, and tucked it into my briefcase. If Cheryl wanted to make this official, I'd make it official too. The first stop that morning wasn't the station. It was the county records office. Inside, the air smelled like paper and time. I nodded to Martha, the clerk behind the desk, who'd been here since before I wore a badge. "Morning, Sheriff," she said. "You're out of uniform today." "Doing some personal research," I said, laying the HOA violation on the counter. "Maple Grove subdivision. I need their charter and the recorded authority of their enforcement committee." She raised an eyebrow, glanced at the paper, and gave a knowing smile. "Oh boy, HOA trouble." Something like that. A few minutes later, she handed me a thin folder, no thicker than my thumb. "Here's their filing. Small association, only valid within their plat boundaries. No authority over public access or emergency vehicles." Exactly what I suspected. They had overstepped. Badly that I thanked her, took the documents, and drove straight to the station. I didn't walk in as Ashraf that morning. I walked in as a homeowner who just happened to have a badge. My deputies looked up from their desks, confused. "Boss, what's going on?" one of them asked. "Just dealing with some paperwork," I said. "The HOA kind." He whistled low. "Good luck with that." By noon, I'd gone through every line of their charter. Their rules allowed them to issue community fines, but those fines weren't legally enforceable unless they went through small claims court, which they never did. Their so-called authority was built on intimidation, not law. I could have just let it go, written them a polite letter, called a meeting, cleared it up. But something in me shifted when I saw the second letter that arrived later that afternoon. Failure to comply will result in additional fines and possible towing at owner's expense. No signature, just the board. They wanted a game of power? Fine. I knew that game better than anyone. That evening, I walked down to the community park. The same board members were setting up folding chairs for their monthly compliance meeting. Cheryl was at the front, giving orders in that clipped, self-important tone she always used when she saw me approach. Her expression tightened. "This is a private meeting," she said. That I smiled politely. "Actually, it's not. HOA meetings are open to all members by law." A few heads turned. She didn't like that. "Well then," she said sharply, "you're free to sit and listen, but please don't interrupt." "Oh, I won't interrupt," I said, taking a seat near the back. "I'll just take notes." The meeting began with her listing violations: trash cans, fences, lawn heights. Every word sounded like a gavel strike. She read from her clipboard with the confidence of a judge, pausing occasionally to glare at those who dared to whisper. Then she reached my name. "Sheriff Allen," she said. "Violation, unauthorized vehicle. Fine, $500. I raised my hand, calm and steady. "On what authority exactly?" Her eyes narrowed. on the authority of the Maple Grove HOA charter. I lifted the folder I'd brought, the same one from the county records office. Actually, I said, that charter doesn't give you enforcement power over official emergency vehicles, nor does it authorize the collection of fines without due process. The room went silent. The words due process tend to do that. I stood slowly, letting the sunlight from the window fall across the badge clipped to my belt. You've been operating outside your legal limits, Cheryl. Intimidating residents. Issuing unenforceable fines. That's not just overreach. That's fraud by representation. Her voice cracked just slightly. You can't talk to me like that. I'm not talking to you as the sheriff, I said quietly. I'm talking to you as a neighbor who's tired of your abuse of authority. Someone in the back chuckled nervously. Someone else whispered, he's right. Cheryl's face flushed red. This meeting is adjourned, she barked, grabbing her clipboard, but the damage was already done. The next day, my driveway was mysteriously splattered with what looked like motor oil. Memo box was dented. Childish retaliation, the kind that tells you you've hit a nerve. That I took photos. Logged times. Collected evidence. I'd seen plenty of HOA power games before, but now it was personal. And when people like Cheryl turn petty, they don't realize that they're recrossing into the world of law. My world that I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to wait, because the next violation she issued wasn't against me. It was against the wrong person. A retired judge who happened to be her next-door neighbor. And that's when things started to get interesting. You can always tell when someone in power starts to feel cornered. They get louder, pettier, and more desperate. Cheryl was no exception. That a few days after that meeting, the weather turned heavy. One of those gray suburban afternoons where thunder rolls low in the distance and the air tastes like rain. I was heading back from the station when I saw the judge, Mr. Whitman, standing at the edge of his driveway, reading a paper that looked all too familiar. Another violation notice that I pulled over. Mr. Whitman was retired now, well into his 70s, sharp as ever, the kind offman who'd spent a lifetime speaking in calm sentences that carried weight. Afternoon, Judge, I said, stepping out of the truck. Everything all right? He looked up at me over his glasses, holding out the paper. Apparently, he said, my front porch light is too bright. I read it. Exterior lighting visible from neighboring properties beyond dusk hours. Interesting law, I said quietly. He nodded. It's not a law. It's Cheryl's imagination. The sky growled above us. I watched as he folded the paper neatly, like a man preparing evidence. You know, he said slowly, in all my years on the bench, I've seen people abuse power in courtrooms, offices, even churches, but never in a cul-de-sac. I smiled faintly. Welcome to HOA country. He looked at me with that judge's calm stare, the kind that doesn't accuse but weighs. You're not going to let this go, are you? No, sir, I said. Not anymore. We stood there a moment, the rain beginning to fall in slow, deliberate drops, and that was when an idea took shape. Not out of anger, but principle. When I got home, I sat at my desk, the sound of rain steady against the window, and began drafting a report. Not as sheriff, not as neighbor, but as a citizen filing a formal complaint of the county compliance division. I attached everything. The violation letters, photos, timestamps, audio recordings from the HOA meeting. I cited their false fines, their overreach, and their failure to file updated financial disclosures for 3 consecutive years. You learn a few things in law enforcement, one of them being that real power isn't loud. It's quiet. It's paperwork, dates, signatures, and patience. That'd be why the end of the week, the county investigator reached out, a woman named Carla Torres. Calm, professional, the kind who didn't waste words. Sheriff, she said on the phone, I read your complaint. You've got a solid case. And it's not just you. We've received 3 similar reports from other residents. I leaned back in my chair. Sounds like a pattern. Exactly, she said. We're opening an inquiry into Maple Grove HOA for unlawful fines and failure to maintain transparency under the Homeowners Association Act. That one sentence felt better than any fine, any argument, any raised voice could. I didn't tell Cheryl. I didn't have to. A week later, 2 unmarked cars rolled into Maple Grove. County compliance officers. They started knocking on doors, asking questions, collecting records. Cheryl's face, when they reached her house, was something I'll never forget. That brittle, frozen smile people get when their empire starts to crack. I watched from my porch, pretending to trim the hedge, as she scrambled to gather binders and documents that had probably been doctored to look official. Her husband stood behind her, expression tight, silent. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the street lamps flickered on, I got a message in my HOA mailbox. Handwritten this time. No official header, no orange ink. Sheriff Allen, we need to talk. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the neighborhood settle into uneasy quiet. The same people who used to glance away when Cheryl spoke were now whispering in small circles, curiosity overtaking fear. The next HOA meeting was different. Sparse attendance, low murmurs, tension you could feel. Cheryl walked in late, hair a little less perfect, voice a little less sure. She began with her usual opening about community standards, but her words stumbled when she reached the part about ongoing cooperation with county officials. She avoided my eyes. Someone asked, "Is it true you can't issue fines anymore until the investigation's done?" Her clipboard trembled just slightly. "That's under review," she said. The room erupted in whispers. I just sat back, arms crossed, watching the balance shift. It wasn't victory yet, not even close, but it was the moment the current changed direction. When the meeting ended, Mr. Whitman approached me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You did this quietly," he said. "The quiet way lasts longer." I replied. He nodded. "You're not after revenge, are you?" "No," I said. "Just correction." But part of me knew that Cheryl wasn't finished. People like her never stop until they're forced to. And sure enough, 2 days later, I found a fresh letter waiting in my mailbox. Only this time, it wasn't about a fine. It was about a special community meeting to discuss member conduct unbecoming off neighborhood standards. The target was me. I smiled. The storm was finally here. It was a Thursday evening when the notice finally became more than words on paper. The special community meeting was set for 6 o'clock sharp in the Maple Grove clubhouse, that beige-painted box at the edge of the neighborhood where all of Cheryl's authority seemed to come alive under flickering fluorescent lights. I pulled into the parking lot 10 minutes early, in uniform this time. My badge caught the golden light of sunset, and I could already feel the tension before I even stepped inside. Through the glass door, I saw the long folding tables lined up like a tribunal. Cheryl stood at center, speaking in that clipped, confident tone, surrounded by her loyal board members. A dozen neighbors sat in metal chairs facing her. Some curious, some uncomfortable, a few already recording on their phones. When I opened the door, the chatter dropped like someone had cut the power. Cheryl's eyes flicked up, and I saw the flash of irritation, maybe fear, cross her face. "Evening," I said calmly, removing my hat. Didn't want to be late. She cleared her throat, straightening her stack of papers. "This meeting," she said, "is to address repeated violations and inappropriate conduct by one of our community members, namely, Sheriff Thomas Allen." The room stirred. A few heads turned my way. A few jaws tightened. Cheryl continued, reading from her notes as if she were standing before a jury. "Over the past several months, there's been a consistent pattern of disruptive behavior, parking violations, interference in HOA matters, and intimidation of board members." I let her talk. Every accusation was a test of patience, one I was more than ready for. When she finally paused, I stepped forward, setting a folder on the table in front of her. "I appreciate the opportunity to respond," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "Would you like me to start with the parking violation that turned out to be my official patrol vehicle, or the intimidation claim where you called the police on me for being me?" A few muffled laughs broke through the silence. Cheryl's jaw tightened. "Sheriff," she said sharply, "this meeting isn't about your position. It's about your disregard for community rules." "Actually," I said, opening the folder, "it's about your disregard for state law." The rustle of paper filled the room as I spread the documents across the table: county investigation notices, compliance findings, copies of the HOA's financial reports, and the formal notice of suspension of their fine authority pending review. "These," I said, tapping the top sheet, "are official findings from the County Compliance Division. As of last week, Maple Grove HOA is under investigation for unlawful fee collection, falsified enforcement letters, and failure to disclose annual budgets, violations punishable by fines, and possible dissolution of the board." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "I knew it." Cheryl froze, her fingers curling around her clipboard. That's a misunderstanding," she stammered. "We've been cooperating fully." I nodded slowly. "You'll have your chance to explain. But until then, issuing new fines, holding disciplinary meetings, or distributing letters is illegal." Her face drained of color. "You can't." I held up a hand. "I can, and I have the county order right here." The air in the room shifted. That strange, quiet energy when fear starts turning into realization. Neighbors who'd once sat silent were now murmuring among themselves that Mr. Whitman stood up from the second row, his voice steady. "Madam President," he said, "a move to suspend all current enforcement actions until the investigation concludes." The motion carried before Cheryl could even find her breath. Hands raised around the room, one after another, until even her closest ally hesitated and finally lifted his too. It was over. Cheryl stared at me, not with anger now, but with disbelief. "You planned this," she said softly. I shook my head. "No, Cheryl, you did." The silence stretched long and heavy. Then I reached into the folder one last time and placed a copy of her own letter on the table, the original parking violation. I slid it toward her gently. "For the record," I said, "I've chosen not to pursue any personal complaint. But I'd suggest you start learning the difference between rules and the law." For the first time, she didn't have a word to say. The meeting dissolved in murmurs. People drifted out in small clusters, voices low but free, like the neighborhood was exhaling for the first time in months. I stayed behind, gathering me papers, while Cheryl packed up her things in silence. When she finally looked up, her eyes were glassy, her tone small. "You didn't have to doubt his," she said. I paused at the door. "Maybe not, but someone had to remind you. Power doesn't make you right." Outside, the air was warm and still. Porch lights flickered on across the street, one after another, like small quiet victories. By the time I got home, the sun was gone, and my driveway was exactly how it should be. Quiet, peaceful, and my own. But the story wasn't finished. The county's final report hadn't been released yet, and Cheryl still had one last move left in here. The kind that doesn't involve rules. The kind that gets real people hurt. And when she made that move, I was ready. Because this time, I wasn't just a sheriff, I was the law standing on its front porch. The calm after that meeting didn't last long. It never does when pride's been bruised. For a few quiet days, Maple Grove seemed normal again. Neighbors waved, lawns were trimmed, and the usual Saturday hum of lawnmowers filled the air. But I knew that stillness, that I'd seen it too many times before in criminal cases, right before someone makes their final mistake. I spent those days half listening for trouble. And it came, not with noise, but with smoke. It was a Tuesday evening when I stepped outside to get the mail and caught the faint scent off burning rubber. I turned the corner of my driveway and saw it, black streaks cut across the concrete like scars, and my patrol truck's rear tire slashed clean open. A slow hiss escaped into the evening air. A single sheet of paper flapped under my windshield wiper, pinned by a stone. "Not so powerful now, are you?" It read in messy handwriting that I didn't need a signature. Cheryl's handwriting was sharper, more deliberate. But the tone, the entitlement, the anger, it was her message loud and clear that I didn't get angry. I didn't even sigh. I took out my phone, snapped a few photos, and called itinerary. Not to my deputies. That would have been too easy. I sent it directly to Carla Torres, the county investigator handling the HOA case. She picked up on the first ring. "Sheriff," she said, "you were right. Things are escalating." "How bad?" I asked. She hesitated. "Bad enough that we're moving to dissolve Maple Grove's board pending our findings. Financial mismanagement, falsified records, and an attempt to intimidate residents. We'll need your statement." "Happy to give it," I said. The next morning, 2 county investigators and 1 deputy arrived in unmarked cars. They spent nearly 3 hours inside the HOA office, that small rented space near the park, pulling out boxes, laptops, binders. Neighbors watched from their porches, whispers spreading faster than wildfire. By noon, Cheryl's empire was crumbling. But pride doesn't surrender easily. That evening, I saw her walking up my driveway. Clipboard gone, face pale, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. For a moment, she didn't look like the iron-fisted HOA president. She looked like someone who'd finally realized the walls had closed in. "Cheryl," I said quietly, "what are you doing here?" She stopped halfway up the path, shoulders trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, voice breaking. "I was just trying to keep the neighborhood perfect." I studied her for a moment. This woman who'd spent months policing mailbox colors and fence heights, who'd find veterans, single mothers, retirees, all in the name of control. "Perfection isn't control," I said softly. "It's peace. And you lost it a long time ago." Her eyes glistened. "They're saying I could be charged. For fraud. For harassment." "I'm not your judge, Cheryl," I said. "But you brought this on yourself." For a second, she seemed like she might argue. Then she just nodded, turned around, and walked away, shoulders small beneath the weight of her own decisions. 2 days later, the county's final report was public. The Maple Grove Homeowners Association is hereby dissolved pending reorganization. All existing fines, debts, and penalties are void. Former board president under formal investigation for misuse of authority and misrepresentation of legal enforcement power. The neighborhood was never the same. And for once, that was a good thing. Neighbors started waving again. Kids rode bikes freely without someone complaining about noise. Mr. Whitman began hosting Saturday morning coffee meetups in his driveway. The air felt lighter, like the street itself had exhaled after months of holding its breath. And me? I parked my patrol truck in the driveway every night after that, not to prove a point, but because I finally could point one evening. As the sun slipped low and painted the houses in amber light, I stood by the mailbox and saw a small envelope tucked inside. No name, no return address. Inside was a short note, written in neat, careful handwriting. "I'm sorry. See." I folded it once and slid it into the same folder, where I kept every violation, every photo, every letter. Not as evidence, as a reminder. Some battles aren't about revenge. They're about restoring what's right. A week later, the neighborhood voted to start fresh. No more power-hungry board, no more pointless fines. Just a volunteer committee to handle maintenance and holiday lights. That first meeting, they asked me to say a few words that I looked around the room. Faces that had once been wary now open and at ease. "Community," I said, "isn't about who has authority. It's about respect. It's about knowing the difference between order and control. We lost that for a while, but we got it back." Applause filled the room, not loud, but honest. When I stepped outside, the night was cool, quiet, and peaceful. Street lights hummed softly, casting warm halos over the pavement. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder. I walked back to my driveway, hands in my pockets, listening to the low hum of crickets in the distance. Justice, when done right, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just settles, like dust after a long storm. I looked up at the stars and smiled to myself. Sometimes, peace is the loudest revenge of all. You'd think that after the county dissolved the HOA, life in Maple Grove would slip quietly back to normal. But peace doesn't return all at once. It drifts in slowly, like morning fog rolling back over calm water. Weeks passed before people really started to smile again. The constant tension that used tone beneath every conversation was gone. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a neighborhood, not a battlefield that I still wore the badge every day. But at home, I was just Tom, the man who waved to kids on bikes, watered his garden, and parked his patrol truck in plain sight, without anyone daring to say a word. Every morning, sunlight caught the polished badge on the dashboard, and did catch myself smiling. It wasn't about pride. It was about the quiet satisfaction that comes when truth finally steadies the scales. The mail was ordinary again, too. No bright orange envelopes, no bold words like violation stamped across the page. Just bills, grocery flyers, and the occasional handwritten note from a neighbor. One morning, I found a small white envelope tucked into the stack. My name written neatly across the front. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a folded note and a photo. The note was simple. Thank you for standing up when the rest of us couldn't. The photo was older, one from the first HOA event years ago, before the tension, before the power games. There was Cheryl in the center, smiling beside a row of new homeowners, myself among them. It was strange seeing us all there, unaware of the storm that would come. I kept that photo, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of how fast good intentions can curdle into control when left unchecked. Cheryl, as I later heard, moved away quietly. No press, no confrontation. The county's investigation ended in a settlement. Community funds returned, no criminal record, but barred from serving on any board for 5 years. Some said it was too light. I thought it was fitting. A kind of exile from the power she once worshipped. Sometimes losing the stage hurts more than any sentence. Mr. Whitman took over as the head of the new neighborhood committee. He asked me to join, but I declined. You don't need me there, I said. You just need to keep things fair. And he did. Under him, Maple Grove began to rebuild, not just its reputation, but its trust. The word fine stopped being a threat. The meetings turned into potlucks. People spoke without fear of being written up. One evening, about a month later, I was standing by my mailbox when I saw a moving truck down the street. A young couple, wide-eyed and smiling, unloading boxes. They looked like every family who'd ever chased the dream of a perfect suburb. The woman waved at me. Hi, we're new here. Anything we should know about the neighborhood? I smiled. Just be kind to your neighbors, I said. That's the only rule that matters. She laughed, thanked me, and went back to unpacking. As the truck pulled away, I looked down the street. Rows of homes bathed in the soft orange glow of sunset. The lawns, the driveways, the trimmed hedges, all symbols of normal life. But this time, it didn't feel artificial. It felt earned. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the faint sound of children laughing somewhere in the distance. The kind of sound that tells you everything is all right again. I thought about all the years I'd spent enforcing the law. How often justice came with noise, flashing lights, and paperwork. But this was something else entirely. A slower kind of justice. The kind that seeps into the soil, invisible but lasting. When the porch light flickered on, I leaned back in the chair, letting the peace of the neighborhood settle around me. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about silence, about letting what's right simply exist. I closed my eyes and breathed in the quiet. The same quiet that once felt suffocating now felt sacred. And as the crickets began their nightly song, I couldn't help but think. After all the noise, all the rules, all the battles fought on driveways and lawns, there was finally balance again. Maybe that's what true revenge really is. Not the sound of victory, but the silence that follows it.